Imagine a world where every animal, big and small, is protected.
Rise up, oh, rise up for the voiceless. No more cruelty. Let's make this world flawless. We'll break the chains, set the creatures free. In unity, together we'll be, we'll be.
Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining our unique webinar today. I'm your host, Dr. Sabine BRELS, Director of World Animal Justice. In this special World Animal Day, I'm pleased to open this high-level experts webinar panel on the legal protection of farm animals with a warm welcome to our brilliant speakers, Giulia Malerbi from Italy, Roslyn Wells from Australia, Nancy Makuvise from Zimbabwe, and Apoorva from India. Today, they will address some legal cases of victories and challenges to protect farm animals around the world. This subject is of very high priority for World Animal Justice, as it is our core mission to combat crimes against animality worldwide. And we know that farm animals are the victims of the most massive legal crimes on Earth nowadays, with billions of terrestrial animals and trillions of aquatic animals killed every year, for food. And every day it's almost 500 million. So it's a huge quantity of crimes against animals every day. That is why World Animal Justice is part of the End It Coalition in support of the global call for global agreements and ban on factory farming, for the triple benefits this would have for animals, humans, and our planet. So before giving the floor to our wonderful panelists today, please allow me to mention just a few practical details. So please note that this webinar is recorded and that you can ask your questions in the Q&A box. And the first part of this webinar will be dedicated to the speakers' presentations, and the second part will be for the panel discussion and answers to questions. So we will be together for about 2 hours, and the replay will be made available afterwards on our worldanimaljustice.org website. So it is now time for me to introduce our first outstanding speaker today, Giulia Malerbi. So Giulia is the head of global policy at Aquatic Life Institute, where she dedicates her expertise to enhancing the welfare of animals raised or caught for food worldwide. She's currently pursuing a master in animal law studies at Lewis and Clark Law School in the US, furthering her knowledge and commitment to animal welfare. It is a huge honor for me to welcome Giulia Malerbi today. Dear Giulia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sabine, for the world introduction. And yeah, hi everyone. Good morning, evening, afternoon, depending where you're based. I have to admit, I'm very excited because I feel it's an honor to be speaking on World Animal Day and to be opening this webinar. So let's dive right in and just bear with me while we try and make tech work for us. Okay. Can you just give me a thumbs up if you can see my screen? Okay, perfect. Okay, let's get started. So, hi everyone. As mentioned by Sabine, my name is Giulia Malerbi and I lead the global policy work at Aquatic Life Institute. A big chunk of our work focuses on octopus farming, which is a topic that is very dear to my heart. So I get very passionate when I talk about this, but it's also very, very relevant for octopuses themselves, but also for a lot of more aquatic species who often don't have the right recognition and protection that they deserve. So this is a brief overview of what we will go through today. So in my talk, I hope that I will take you on a journey to try and unveil the true impact of octopus farming. I will start by briefly presenting to you the issue, and then we will move on into evaluating the welfare, ethical, environmental, and public health concerns associated with this practice. While I speak, I will also try to examine and debunk some of the main claims that we often hear the industry making. And last but not least, we will focus on the legislative aspects of octopus farming and why I feel so strongly about the need for a preemptive ban. I will also share with you some legislative consideration in very specific jurisdictions. I know that we have Q&A at the end, so I'm really excited to engage in discussions with you all. Now, before diving into the more scientific and legislative aspects of my talk, I want to share with you a more of a personal reflection. When I started working at Aquatic Life Institute, we were analyzing with our team this issue of octopus farming, and I came across this photo. Now, what captured my attention was the caption, which, as you can read here, it says, "Octopus raised in captivity like this one could save their wild relatives from overfishing." Now, as an animal advocate, I admit to you that I really struggle to associate this concept of farming as a conservation effort. But I decided to challenge this reluctance of mine and really question, like, is it farming could really be a conservation effort in this case? Now, unfortunately, after the initial appeal of this argument, our research led to a very different conclusion. And the more we were learning about this practice, it was clear that octopus farming does not benefit their wild counterparts, but rather amplifies other profound issues. So today, I'm here telling you why octopus farming represents a symbol of what humans shouldn't be doing, which is the title of an article that came out on The Guardian just earlier this year. Now, I'm aware that you might be wondering, like, why is there such a push for octopus farming in the first place? And this is because you might be aware that the global demand for seafood is really skyrocketing. And this is adding insane pressure on marine ecosystems. So this increase in demand led to overfishing. And this was depleting many species at unsustainable rates. Now, of course, among those affected, we find octopuses. This reduction of wild octopus population due to overfishing, let's say, sort of sparked an interest in pursuing intensive farming. And just to give you an idea why we decided to launch a global campaign, we heard of plans being considered in Spain, Mexico, the US, and Japan. So this is not really a problem that pertains to one single jurisdiction, but it is really a global issue. Now, I believe octopus farming is seen as an opportunity for other reasons, which are economic reasons. Octopuses grow very quickly, so they reach maturity within a matter of months. They live 1 to 2 years, so this means that these allow a very fast turnover in farming cycles. And last but not least, they command a very premium prices on the market. So they are sold, they have a very high value on the market. So these, I believe, so economic reasons are what make them attractive for intensive aquaculture operations. In 2024, though, I also think we cannot just stop at economic considerations. And I hope that by the end of my talk, I will have convinced you that this notion that farming can alleviate pressure on wild population is unfortunately very misleading and oversimplified, because it does not take into account the broader impact on ecosystems as well as animal welfare. Speaking of animal welfare, let's dive right into. So several scientists highlighted the many issues of octopus farming. And I just want to summarize this by saying that all of these issues are related to the fact that these animals, unfortunately, like many others, are just not suited in any way, shape, or form to large-scale farming. I want to share with you just the main ones. First of all, octopuses are highly intelligent, and as you might know, they are very complex beings and they are renowned for their problem-solving abilities. So this means that their need for mental stimulation makes them very unsuitable for the typical restrictive and monotonous conditions on intensive farms. And this means that a lack of enrichment for them would lead to boredom or chronic stress. Also, these animals are solitary by nature, so they do not thrive in crowded conditions, while unfortunately we know that a standard industry practice usually involves high stocking density. In the case of octopuses, this can lead to cannibalism. They also don't have internal and external skeletons. So this makes them very fragile to any change in their environmental setups. And lastly, there is no humane slaughter method today known to humanely slaughter octopuses. What is used so far is the method of ice slurry, which it's a very cruel and painful method, so much that even the European Food Safety Authority discourages the uses of it for many aquatic species. But on top of the animal welfare concerns, there are also environmental and public health risks associated with this practice. First of all, octopuses are a carnivorous species. So this means that they require wild-caught feed. And evidence gathered around the world has shown that intensive farming of other carnivorous species, for example, salmon, have caused really great decimation of their related wild species because of pathogens, competition, genetic abnormalities, and honestly, many other factors. So the concerns that octopus farm would cause similar impacts on already vulnerable and declining wild population is actually pretty profound. And also, if we take into account that they have carnivorous diets, this would just further deplete fish stocks and disrupt marine biodiversity. I also want to touch a point that I often hear when I talk about this topic is that, oh, but octopus farming is going to help us solve the problem of food security. Well, octopus meat is not really a necessity for survival. In other words, it's not going to feed the hungry world. And this is evidenced by the consumption pattern of octopus meat, which primarily happen in the EU and the US, so countries with high disposable incomes. So once again, this argument that octopus farming can contribute to food security is flawed. And also, I'm sure that when I say octopus, one of the first things that comes to your mind is the fact that they are masters at escaping. So the possibility of having one octopus like escaping into the wild and spreading pathogens from the farmed ones to the wild populations is actually a very likelihood possibility. And last but not least, I just want to mention that our understanding of their system is still pretty limited. So I don't know how you feel about this, but since we came out of a pandemic, it just feels there's too many unknowns and gap in knowledge linked to this practice at this stage. Now, before we dive into the legislative aspect of my talk, I just want to take a moment to sort of pick on your imagination. So bear with me here. Now, when I say octopus or even octopus farming, I'm sure this is a picture that could come into mind, right? So a wonderful, majestic creature at the bottom of the ocean. We're not talking about this. We're talking about taking that incredible being and putting it in a barren tank, born and raised in captivity. So I want to try and sort of picture, let us imagine what we're really trying to do, because we're talking at World Animal Justice. So what are we doing? Are we doing justice to this animal? This doesn't look like this to me. And we also have some footage that I have here with you. Hopefully I can make the videos go. Oh no, maybe I cannot make the videos go. Okay, maybe I can make the videos go. So these are some videos of a sort of a petting zoo / farm / research facility. So you can see what basically is going on. So this is what we're planning to do, right? Taking, again, incredible sentient being, putting them in barren tanks and just play with them as we see fit, without any regard for their well-being or needs. Now, this to me, it looks like the exact opposite of animal justice. Now, I wanted to take you through these videos and images because, yeah, when we talk about legislation, sometimes I feel that it's harder maybe to connect it directly with the animal. But these are really, really big concerns because in several jurisdictions, actually most of the aquaculture legislation is just ill-equipped to address the needs and unique behaviors of octopuses. And because there are no specific provisions in any of aquaculture regulations for the welfare of cephalopods, this potential emerging industry would be completely unregulated. And the videos that I've just shown you prove exactly that. There's no rules, there's no guidelines on how to keep them into captivity, meaning that we could potentially do whatever we want to these animals. And that, once again, that doesn't feel like justice to me. Now, I told you that I wanted to try to debunk some claims that I've heard. And another one is the fact that it helps traditional fishing community, which actually octopus farming would do exactly the opposite, because it would introduce more competition. And let me turn once again to salmons, because we've seen this already in Chile and Argentina, where large-scale salmon farming had so much detrimental impacts on the local population that it finally led to a ban on large-scale salmon farming in Tierra del Fuego in Argentina. And the last thing that I want to mention is that if you take into account some of the major, let's say, global conservation objectives, like, for example, One Health approach, which emphasizes the interconnectedness of human, animal, and environmental health, octopus farming would just disrupt this balance that One Health approach seeks to maintain. And also, if we take a look at the UN High Seas Treaty, which in short aims to protect marine biodiversity and preserve ecosystem, we would promote a practice that degrade marine environments and overexploit species for commercial gain. So if you look even at global conservation objectives, octopus farming go against these global conservation goals. So I feel really strongly about the need for a preemptive ban, because I think that in 2024 is the time that we advocate and we put forward measures that prioritize animal welfare and environmental considerations from the very start, rather than try and come up with legislation to try and address damage after it has already occurred. Now, I wanted to end, let's say, this part with a brief overview of current legislation, either what's going on or what I believe should be going on in some jurisdictions. So starting with the European Union, the EU has been long and considered a leader when it comes to animal welfare. And I believe that there are actually several legal pathways to establish a preemptive ban on octopus farming here. So one notable initiative I wanted to point out is the ban on seal product imports, which was based on the inhumane hunt and slaughter of this animal. Now, what I want to highlight is that this ban was granted on the basis of protecting public morals. So to me, this is a perfect precedent that can help us set a framework that can easily extend to octopus farming. Another thing that I want to mention is that if you take a look at the EU strategic guidelines for sustainable aquaculture, they encourage diversification to low-trophic species, which means non-carnivorous species. So once again, octopus farming goes against these EU guidelines. I want to quickly move on to the UK, where most of you will be familiar with the Sentience Act or the Animal Welfare Act, which finally acknowledges cephalopod sentience. Now, this is the problem that I have with legislation. It cannot just be a mere acknowledgement. This acknowledgement needs to be translated into a legal duty for policymakers and to create a legislative platform to ban octopus farming practices based on the animal welfare concerns that I shared with you earlier. And last but not least, in the United States, I wanted to end on a positive note. We've had quite a lot of successes for these fantastic animals. So there are some positive recent state level actions that I believe deserve attention. So really thrilled to share with you that Washington State and California State banned octopus farming. So this bill that were introduced last year and this year are definitely legislation right now, which is huge, but it doesn't stop here. We're working in several other states, as you can see here, from Connecticut, Hawaii, Oregon, New York, New Jersey, who also have interest in presenting similar bills. And just this past July, we managed to get the support to get a bill introduced at the federal level, a bill that doesn't just only ban octopus farming, but also ban the imports of farmed octopus products, should they ever become available on the market. So I just wanted to leave you with this, because I think it's important that we recognize that advocacy efforts do lead to positive outcome for animals. And let me just close my talk with this artificial intelligence generated image. And just take a moment to take this in, because I want octopus farming to be nothing more than this. So nothing more than fiction. So my invitation for you today is to join forces with me, with us, with all advocates working to have a compassionate world, to ensure that really octopus farming stays in the realm of imagination and just never becomes a reality. Thank you so much for listening to me. I really look forward to diving into discussion and the Q&A with all of you.
Thank you so much for your excellent presentation, Giulia. It was a challenge to address so comprehensively this increasingly important issue of octopus farming and its dire consequences for these sentient animals. You did it brilliantly, and in raising this imperative for the preemptive bans and even for a global ban on this serious issue. So I'm now introducing our next amazing speaker today, Roslyn Wells. So Roslyn is the former Director of Public Affairs for the Animal Justice Party in Australia. On this behalf, she developed and led the national live export campaign and communications at a critical time, leading up to the live export of ships ban last July. Roslyn holds a Master of International Relations from the University of Sydney, and she's a public affairs and international relations professional with extensive experience, including animal advocacy. We can't be more lucky to have Roslyn Wells in this panel. Dear Roslyn, now the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Sabine. Hello, everyone. On the 1st of July this year, legislation to end the cruel live sheep trade by sea successfully passed the Australian Parliament. The Act came into effect on the 10th of July, legislating an end date of the 1st of May 2028 and initiating a 4-year transition. How was this landmark legislation achieved, and what were the key events and actions that paved the way? May I have the first slide, please, Dorky? Thank you. Firstly, I'd like to give you a quick overview of the regulatory system for farm animals in Australia. Australia is a federation of 6 states and 2 territories, with the national government based in Canberra. Most of the responsibility for animal welfare, its regulation and enforcement resides with these states and territories. There is no national department, no independent office or ministerial portfolio dedicated to animal welfare. This is something that the Animal Justice Party and the animal protection organisations in Australia have been calling for. There is no national law governing the principles and protection of animals, and no national recognition of animal sentience in Australian law at either the federal or state level. The Federal Department of Agriculture is responsible for the regulation of the live export trade and administers the Exporter Supply Chain Assurance System, known as ESCAS, which exporters must comply with to export animals for slaughter. This ESCAS has failed repeatedly, with animals ending up in the hands of unauthorised operators overseas and subjected to brutal handling and slaughter. The department is focused on developing Australia's agricultural sector, with responsibility for animal welfare within agriculture, while also being the regulator of live exports. Clearly, this is an inherent conflict of interest, with commercial considerations routinely eclipsing animal welfare. The repeated failures of the live export supply chain system have shown the impossibility of controlling and guaranteeing animal welfare once the animals are sent beyond Australia's jurisdiction. The Department of Agriculture also operates the Independent Observer Program, which is supposed to ensure that a qualified independent person monitors the conditions on board each live export shipment. In reality, most live export ships leave Australian ports without an independent observer on board, with obvious implications for transparency and animal welfare. It's no surprise then that Australia was awarded a relatively low D ranking in World Animal Protection's Global Index in 2020. The rankings run from A to G. This was a comparative assessment of 50 countries based on their legislative and policy records on animal welfare. Even with independent observers on board, the animals suffer greatly on these filthy live export carriers, where they're subjected to heat stress, humidity, thirst, hunger, unfamiliar contaminated food, motion sickness, illness, injuries, and having to lie and stand in wet manure throughout their journey. On arrival at their destinations, after enduring weeks at sea, the animals face brutal, inept handling, followed by terrifying, painful slaughter without stunning. Notably, the animal welfare standards set by the World Organization for Animal Health, formerly the OIE, to which Australia is a signatory, are a very low bar and do not mandate that animals are stunned before slaughter. In fact, these standards are merely guidelines. May I have the next slide, please? Thank you. I'm going to move now to a brief chronology of the live sheep export ban. Thank you. In May 2022, the current federal Labor government, led by Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, was elected promising to phase out the live sheep trade by sea, but with no commitment to an end date. Despite having just won an electoral mandate, and with most Australians opposed to the live export trade, the government was under pressure from the live export industry to reverse its position. The challenge for the animal protection sector was to determine how to counter the live export industry's influence and lobbying to ensure the government kept its promise. Collectively, we needed to mobilise community support through effective campaigns and actions, and to make the political, economic and legal case for the live sheep trade to cease. In March 2023, the federal government established an independent panel to advise on how and when the live sheep trade should be phased out, as per its May 22 election promise. Unbelievably, there was no mention of animal welfare in the panel's terms of reference, a glaring omission. The sheep consigned to the cruel live export trade were being relegated to the status of commodities. Like the mythical elephant in the room, they were the sheep in the room, unseen and disregarded, invisible, silent stakeholders, just cargo. Coinciding with the appointment of the Government Advisory Panel, the live export industry launched a well-resourced PR and lobbying campaign with the objective of pressuring the government into weakening or reversing its election commitment to phase out the live sheep trade. Over the next 6 months, the advisory panel conducted a community and industry consultation process on the phase out of the live sheep trade by sea. The panel received more than 800 submissions and several thousand survey responses from individuals and organisations throughout Australia, with 80% in favour of the live sheep trade phase out. As part of our advocacy efforts, the Animal Justice Party lodged a detailed submission on the live sheep trade phase out, which I prepared, and held a national webinar to provide guidance to members and supporters on preparing an effective submission. In June 2023, it was revealed in a Senate estimates hearing that the federal government was surreptitiously greenlighting the reopening of the live sheep trade to Saudi Arabia, which had been in abeyance since 2012. Given the Saudi government's history of rejecting shipments on a whim, with dire consequences for the animals on board, the resumption of live sheep exports to Saudi Arabia was bad news. It also completely undermined the Australian government's credibility on its election commitment to phase out the live sheep trade. May I have the next slide, please? In September 2023, the RSPCA launched an online petition calling on the government to legislate an end date for live sheep export, amplifying the calls for legislation from the AJP and animal protection sector. The petition quickly secured around 44,000 signatures and became one of the largest e-petitions ever presented to the Australian Parliament, a testament to the depth of community support for the live sheep trade phase out. The Legislate the Date hashtag launched on social media around the same time and was a very effective campaign messaging tool to exert pressure on the government to keep its promise and act. In October 2023, the advisory panel sent its report to the Minister for consideration. May I have the next slide, please? This brings us to the Bahija crisis. In early January 2024, the live export carrier, the MV Bahija, departed the port of Fremantle, Western Australia, heading to Israel via the Red Sea, with approximately 15,000 sheep and 2,000 cattle on board. 2 weeks into its voyage, the Department of Agriculture ordered the Bahija to return to Australia due to escalating attacks on shipping by Houthi rebels in the Red Sea. The Houthi attacks on this crucial shipping lane had been occurring since late 2023. So the question is, why was the Bahija's voyage approved, sending the animals and crew into an active conflict zone? It was just the first in a series of poor decisions by the department. What happened next showed that animal welfare was a very secondary consideration for both the export company and the government, despite the industry's constant claims that it was exporting world-leading animal welfare along with the animals. After 2.5 weeks at sea, the Bahija returned to Fremantle, where it languished in the port for another 2 weeks during a prolonged heat wave, while the exporter sought approval to re-export the animals via Africa, which was denied. After nearly 2 months in limbo, the animals were finally unloaded and held in quarantine. Some of them perished and others were sent to slaughter in Australia, but most of them remained pending the department's next move. By this stage, there was almost daily national media coverage of the unfolding crisis and regular protests done at the docks. The Bahija quickly became a flashpoint, reigniting media interest in the live export issue and increasing pressure on the government. Then, in a disgraceful decision, on the 1st of March, the department announced that it had approved a second application for the remaining sheep and cattle to be re-exported to Israel. This second voyage would bypass the Red Sea conflict zone by sailing around Africa's Cape of Good Hope, a grueling journey of around 34 days on top of the nearly 2 months the animals had already spent on board and in transit. By the time the Bahija reached the port of Haifa in Israel on the 9th of April, it was over 3 months since it had set sail back in early January, an unprecedented length of time for a live export shipment. The Animal Justice Party had launched a rapid response action on social media when the Bahija first docked in Fremantle, followed by a series of direct actions and advocacy targeting all government MPs and senators. With the announcement that the animals would be re-exported, we ramped up our efforts. From the outset, our campaign messaging went straight to the point. Live export is an animal welfare disaster and a disaster waiting to happen. We rolled out a hard-hitting email action targeting all members of the federal government, from the Prime Minister and Agriculture Minister down, calling on them to act, to confirm and legislate an end date for the live sheep trade by sea in the current term of government. Several thousand emails were sent to government MPs and senators, reminding them that voters expected them to deliver on their election promise without delay. Animals Australia and the Alliance for Animals ran similar campaigns and email actions, supported by many dedicated activists and concerned Australians on social media, resulting in a high-impact collective advocacy effort. The Bahija crisis had demonstrated yet again that the live sheep trade was irredeemable and completely incompatible with good animal welfare. But was the government listening? May I have the next slide, please? The answer came just before the federal budget, with an announcement by the Minister on the 11th of May that live sheep exports by sea would end on the 1st of May 2028. The 4-year transition would be funded by $107 million support package to help sheep farmers and industry participants move away from live export. The industry had pushed for a 10-year transition, so 4 years, while still too long, was a better outcome. On 26th of June this year, in the first step of the bill's passage into law, the House of Representatives passed the legislation declaring the phase-out of the live sheep trade. The bill then proceeded to the Senate for further debate and review. On the 1st of July, in a late-night sitting, the Senate passed the legislation enshrining the end of the live sheep trade by sea from Australia in law, with an end date of the 1st of May 2028. Right up until the vote, the pro-live export lobbyists were still trying to influence senators and derail the passage of the bill. This was a hard-won historic victory, the culmination of decades of relentless advocacy and protests, much of it founded on the searing in-country investigations by Animals Australia, coupled with brave whistleblower accounts, including from former live export ship vets, and media exposés, which brought images of live export cruelty to the general public. May I have the next slide, please? Animals Australia's investigations have shown the importance of amassing irrefutable documentary evidence of the animal cruelty and suffering in the live export trade and building evidence-based campaigns for policy change. It would be fair to say that Animals Australia has been the de facto live export industry watchdog, lodging 76 legal complaints since 2012 on the repeated failures of live exporters to comply with regulations. The animal protection sector in Australia has also been greatly strengthened by the formation in 2022 of the Australian Alliance for Animals, a national strategic alliance of the key animal protection organisations operating here, namely Animals Australia, World Animal Protection, the Humane Society International, Four Paws and Voiceless, as well as the leading UK animal charity Compassion in World Farming. With a combined supporter base of over 2 million people, the Alliance has quickly become a strong, effective voice for animals in Australia. The Animal Justice Party, or the AJP, is the political wing of the animal rights movement in Australia and is the only political party dedicated to animal rights. It was founded in 2009 and currently has 2 MPs, one in New South Wales and one in Victoria, the 2 largest states. The AJP will be fielding candidates in the upcoming federal election, which is expected to be held in early 2025. While the Animal Justice Party is not a member of the Australian Alliance for Animals, it engages in dialogue with the Alliance in support of legislative and policy reform for animals and achieving common objectives. As a minor political party, the AJP seeks to maximise its influence in elections at the local, state and federal levels by directing preferences to other parties and candidates who are supportive of policy reform for animals and campaigning against those with anti-animal policies and agendas. In a preferential voting system like Australia's, a few percentage points can influence or change the outcome in an electorate. May I have the next slide, please? Over the last decade or so, live export has emerged as a vote-changing issue in Australia. Politicians ignore public opinion on this issue at their peril. Public opinion research shows consistently that animal welfare is an important issue for Australians, with 68% of respondents agreeing that stronger animal welfare standards are needed for farm animals. A majority of respondents, 53%, were more likely to vote for a political candidate or party who commits to improving animal welfare. Independent polling commissioned by the RSPCA in 2022 found that 2/3 of respondents supported an end to live exports, including 2/3 of people in rural and regional areas. Interestingly, opposition to the live export trade was highest at 70% in Western Australia, the state that produces most of the sheep consigned to the trade. This directly contradicts the industry's claim that it's only city dwellers and activists who oppose the live export trade. Many farmers also oppose the live export trade on animal welfare grounds. The same poll also showed around 8 in 10 Australians opposed any reduction in the prohibited 3-month period over the northern summer for live sheep being shipped to the Middle East. In economic terms, Australia's live sheep trade has declined from around 6 million sheep exported in 2002 down to 570,000 sheep in 2023. Live sheep exports are now an insignificant 0.1% of Australia's total agricultural exports. Economic analysis shows that the live sheep trade has been in long-term decline, notably over the last decade. The majority of sheep and lambs produced in Australia, or Western Australia rather, are now slaughtered locally, with 90% of this meat exported chilled or frozen. While some Middle Eastern markets continue to insist on live animals and are unhappy with this transition, Australia is under no obligation to comply given the level of animal suffering involved in live export. The so-called drug dealer defence often used by the industry, if we don't supply them then someone else will, is an ethically bankrupt justification. Overall, much of the transition away from the live sheep trade has already occurred. Using such public opinion and economic data to counter industry propaganda has been an important part of making the case against live export. Many participants in the live sheep trade here have seen the writing on the wall and already moved away from it, weakening the industry's claim that farmers would not be able to adjust to the end of the trade. They've had plenty of time to do so and will be helped by the multi-million-dollar government assistance package. The animal protection lobby in Australia will continue to press for a faster transition, given the heat stress that sheep continue to suffer on live export ships, as well as the inherent cruelty and ungovernability of the trade. May I have the next slide, please? However, as we've seen in Australia recently, there's been a backlash from disgruntled elements in the industry who continue to rail against the legislated phase out of the live sheep trade. Opportunistically, the federal opposition, the right-wing Liberal National Coalition, has been quick to promise that it will overturn the live sheep trade ban if it wins the next election. This backlash reinforces the importance of shoring up and defending our victories for animals and taking nothing for granted. It's essential to remind politicians, as our policymakers and legislators, that animal welfare is an increasingly important policy area for voters and a voting determinant that crosses party lines. In this regard, New Zealand serves as both an inspiration and a warning. In March 2021, the former New Zealand Labor government, led by Jacinda Ardern, committed to banning the live export of all cattle, sheep, goats, and deer by sea. The full ban came into force 2 years later, on the 30th of April 2023, with New Zealand becoming the first country to enact such a ban. It had already banned the live export of animals for slaughter in 2008, but dairy breeding cattle were exempted. However, New Zealand's current right-wing coalition government came to power in November 2023, stating its intention to rescind the live export ban. While the ban remains in force, it's under threat. Globally, the momentum to ban the live export trade is gathering pace, with the passage of the UK's historic legislation in May this year, ending decades of grueling journeys for UK animals exported to European countries for slaughter. The pressure is now on European governments to enact similar legislation. In April last year, we saw a Brazilian court ban the export of live cattle from Brazilian ports on animal welfare grounds, with the judge stating that, quote, "Animals are not things, they are sentient living beings, that is, individuals who feel hunger, thirst, pain, cold, anguish, fear." While this Brazilian ruling is subject to review by a higher court, it is nevertheless a welcome sign that the live export trade is increasingly being challenged and held to account in another jurisdiction. The importance of such precedents and mutually reinforcing live export bans cannot be underestimated. This archaic trade is a relic of the past and has no place in the 21st century. The litany of live export disasters is long and tragic and will continue as long as this cruel trade exists. Live export will always be an animal welfare disaster and a disaster waiting to happen. Its demise can't come soon enough. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Roslyn. It was a super instructive presentation. And thanks to you, we know more about this process leading to this long-awaited ban on live exports of millions of sheep from Australia to Middle East countries. And let's hope that this groundbreaking decision will not be overturned and that the terribly long transport and slaughtering conditions of these animals will be ended for good. So I will now introduce our third wonderful speaker today, Nancy Makuvise. So Nancy is an animal advocate and lecturer at the Great Zimbabwe University, and she's also a consultant in animal law, welfare, and wildlife crimes, with a focus on One Health concept and plant-based advocacy. She has developed wildlife law curriculum and trained legal professionals and rangers. She educated communities and even co-authored a children's book on animal welfare. Dear Nancy, it's a huge honor for me to have you in this panel. And now, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sabine, and a warm welcome to everybody who's joining us from wherever they are. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. And let me just share my screen so we can start. If you can give me a thumbs up if it's okay, if my screen.
Yeah, sure. Take your time to share your presentation.
Okay. Are we on? Can you see my screen?
We see that you're sharing your screen, but we don't see your PowerPoint. I guess you need to choose the window where you see your PowerPoint. Yes.
Okay. Can you now see it?
Yeah, we can see.
Okay.
If you want, you can put it full screen or leave it like this, as you prefer. But maybe full screen is better.
Okay, let me do that.
It's on the bottom left of your screen. You see the diaporama icon. Yes, yeah, right here. Yeah.
The slideshow?
Yeah, slideshow, yeah. Yes, great, thank you.
Okay. So my presentation will be on the intersection of animal law and veganism for animal protection, how the two have a mutual benefit that can help us in advancing both. So the first thing I'll talk about is just give a brief introduction on what animal law is, and then I'll move on to what veganism is. So animal law is a field of law that focuses on the welfare, protection, and the rights of animals. It has several fields, subfields in it, which include animal welfare law, animal rights law, wildlife law, environmental law, and agricultural law. Then veganism is a lifestyle choice that seeks to exclude, as far as possible, all forms of exploitation of animals, either for food, for clothing, or for any other purposes. Its core principles are enshrined in avoiding animal products, having compassion for the animals, and non-exploitation of animals for whatever reason. So the objectives of my presentation will be to focus on how animal welfare and veganism can support each other, and to provide examples and potential strategies for collaboration. And finally, to put out a call to action to each and every one of us to see how we can work in animal advocacy or vegan advocacy for the betterment of the life of animals. I'll start with the common goals that I believe veganism and animal law have in common. Both advocate for protecting animal welfare and preventing cruelty. When industrial agricultural farming is happening, most of the conditions that the animals are living in are inhumane conditions. There are practices that are there that inflict pain and restrict the natural behavior of animals. And this is what some of the things that we will be working towards when we talk about protecting animal welfare and preventing cruelty of animals as they are being farmed. There's also the common goal of promoting animal rights and interests, where we say animals are sentient living beings that have the capacity to feel pain, to feel joy, and to feel even sadness. So that's also another point. And then we'll also talk about how another common goal is reducing animal exploitation and suffering. We definitely use animals for our benefit. We do not stop to think that we're actually exploiting these living sentient beings and putting them through processes that cause pain and suffering for them. And when we talk about vegan advocacy and animal law advocacy, both of them advocate for the reduction of this animal exploitation and suffering. And they also have a common goal of prioritizing compassion and empathy. I believe there's a strategic overlap between the two, in that as they work together, both of them lobby for animal protection laws. They also support animal welfare organizations in their work, and they do this work through engaging in public outreach and education. And they also collaborate with other social justice movements. When we talk about collaborating with other social justice movements, what I'm basically talking about is how we can talk about the One Health approach that talks about the environmental health, animal health, and human health. So when we use this approach, what we are simply doing is saying there's an interconnectedness between the animal health, the human health, and the environmental health. And if we can stop industrial agricultural farming and move towards eating more plants and less meat and reducing our consumption of meat, overall, we improve the health of the environment, we improve the health of human beings, and we also improve the health and lives of animals. I also believe that there's mutual benefits that can be brought about by the synergy between animal law and veganism. And one of them is a reduction in animal suffering. When you choose to transition to a plant-based diet, or when you choose to become vegan, there's a direct impact on the reduction of animal suffering. It means less animals are farmed in overcrowded and inhumane conditions. It also means that there's less animals that are slaughtered if we have more people choosing to go vegan or to move towards plant-based diets. There's also the promotion of ethical consumption. People have an idea of the type of food they are eating, how it was grown, and how it came to be. So people tend to make informed food choices. When we give people all this information, they tend to sit down and their empathy comes out and their ethical reasoning kicks in, and they can decide whether they want to eat eggs from egg-laying hens that were bred in battery cages, or they want the free-range eggs. So people then get the idea of what is happening out there in the world, and they can pick whether they want to support cruelty-free brands or not. And then another mutual benefit that I've considered is that there's a cultural shift towards compassion. I'm African, and where I come from, if somebody visits your house, the first thing you do is to kill a chicken for them to yes, for the meal that you are going to share. That's an example of you saying you're welcoming your guests. We have so many celebrations that we do that would be insufficient, if I can say, if there has not been any animal that has been slaughtered. But if we have this advocacy between veganism and animal law, what we tend to put out to people, or what we get from people, is that cultural shift towards compassion. We get to have a change in perceptions of people as more and more people switch to a vegan lifestyle or a plant-based diet. We have more and more people having a mind shift when it comes to animal rights and animal welfare. We also have a mutual benefit of sustainability and habit preservation. This takes place in the fact that a lot of land and water is being used in industrial agricultural farming. So if we use animal law and veganism to advocate for a change in that, we have less habitat reduction and ecosystem degradation, because less animals will be farmed, which will lead to environmental sustainability. Another mutual benefit would be the mutual support that is there for animal justice. Usually, veganism advocacy often overlaps with animal rights advocacy, which leads to policy formulation and legislative reform for laws that are there that advocate for industrial animal farming. Then my next slide talks about case studies of success stories of mutual benefits between animal law and veganism. We've got non-profit partnerships that work in this area. The list is exhaustive. I've just picked out a few that I've had a chance to interact with. There's Thrive Philanthropy, which was running an African Vegan Restaurant Week just in September, early September, 2 to 8 September 2024. We have Pro-Veg, the incubator program that they have, the Kickstarting for Good. We have the Humane Society of the United States, which initiated the Meatless Monday project. There was the Animal and Vegan Advocacy Summit. I think it's done almost every year. This, clearly shows the synergy or the mutual benefit that is there between animals and between animal and vegan advocacy. There's the Animal Legal Defense Fund, which also works together with other vegan advocates to legislate for better laws that take care of the animal welfare and animal rights as well. So these are just examples that I've given. There's a whole lot more, but I couldn't put all of them or talk about all of them. And then we also have case studies of legislative wins that have been there worldwide. We've got the successful bans on cruel farming practices like export of live animals, the use of battery cages for egg-laying hens. And as one of our co-presenters was presenting the first one, she spoke about how she's working on the banning of octopus farming. that's something that is also still in the works. We've got other people advocating for the ban on the use of farrowing crates for pigs, and also still the export of live animals in some countries. And then I will move on to the key challenges that I think are there when it comes to using animal law and veganism together to advance the protection of animals. There is definitely going to be resistance from traditional agricultural sectors. These are people who are making lots and lots and lots of money on industrial agricultural farming. And definitely with veganism and plant-based diets coming into play, it means there should be a reduction in their business. And that is not something that they will take lightly. So that I actually consider this one of the most key challenges that we have on this. And then there's also the misinformation and misunderstanding about veganism and plant-based diets. Most people do not understand what this is about and what you're supposed to do. I keep getting questions from people who say, so if I stop eating meat, how am I going to get my proteins? They believe the only way for you to get your proteins is through meat consumption. And then there's also the challenge of balancing economic impacts on communities that are reliant on animal agriculture. This is it's also a top challenge that I have, especially when I consider the global south as well. We have lots of communities who are reliant on animal agriculture. I'll give an example like here in Zimbabwe, it's almost every household has some cage in the backyard where somebody is keeping chickens for sale. This is a means of living for some people. This is how they make money. This is how they live. So if we are to advocate for a reduction of that or a complete stop of that, we are bound to face some resistance from them as well. And then there's the issue of cultural shift resistance. I spoke about this just earlier on as well. It's a difficult one to have people move away from their culture that they have been doing for generations and generations on end. But respectfully, if you speak to them and you educate them and you do awareness campaigns, eventually we'll get somewhere and we'll have a cultural shift. And then there's also negative responses or backlash. This happens quite a lot. I remember when I stopped, I was a prosecutor before, and I stopped, I left that job so I could become an animal lawyer. I had people who would literally laugh every time I introduced myself as an animal lawyer, and they would ridicule me about it. So this is one of the key challenges that you're likely, or one is likely to face when they talk about reducing the consumption of meat or literally stopping using or relying on any animal products. Then I have strategies for the enhancement of the synergy between animal law and veganism. And one of them is integrating animal law education into plant-based advocacy and vice versa as well. This is just basically educating people from the grassroots, I believe, going to the top, where you educate people on how the two can work together for the betterment of ourselves and for the betterment of our health, the environmental health, and for the betterment of the animals. And then we can also engage with local governments on legislative measures that support both causes. I am aware there are some countries that have actually enacted legislative measures that support plant-based diets. And it would be a good thing also to do, I suppose, in my country as well. I think we're still a bit far behind, but eventually we'll catch up. There's also the need to host community events that highlight the link between plant-based diets and animal rights and welfare. I'll give an example of Thrive Philanthropy, which was working on African Vegan Restaurant Week, where people had to go into the communities and find one restaurant that would actually want to work with them in introducing plant-based diets. We can also have more webinars like this one. Hint, hint, Sabine, we need more of these podcasts, just even online courses that people can take to learn more about this. And then I also see that there are people who do online pledges for people to sign. If we can have more of those as well, and collaborative efforts can also help. And then to end, I wanted to end with what I call a call to action, where we are looking at what are you going to do yourself to actually advance animal protection through animal law and veganism. We talk about stakeholder collaboration, where you can involve the government, you can involve local city councils, you can involve private entities, private companies, you can involve schools, institutions, a whole lot of people to work with, so that at the end, what we have is better animal protection. And then we also talk about community engagement, going out into the communities, not necessarily focusing only on webinars and podcasts, but actually going out into the communities and meeting the people there and meeting the communities and talking to all of them about what animal law is, and animal welfare, animal rights. And then we also talk about veganism and plant-based diets, and how both actually are beneficial or can work together for the betterment of our health, of the environment's health as well. And then the final thing would be your personal reflections that you are going to do as an individual. One may not necessarily want to go vegan at this point, but you could try do something that reduces animal suffering. You could try adopt meatless Mondays. You could try do a week where you eat only plant-based meals. You could try and just reduce the amount of meat that you eat. You could just try and send a message, talk about animal law, talk about animal welfare, talk about animal rights, and talk about veganism as well, and how the two actually help to for the betterment of animal protection. Thank you, Sabine, and everybody else for listening. This is what I have for now.
Thank you so much, Nancy. Thank you very much for your insightful presentation and the context in Africa, which is always good to know. So yes, you did brilliantly explore the potential for mutual reinforcement in advancing animal law and promoting a vegan lifestyle, and to foster this collaborative and effective movement for animal justice, and ultimately, of course, enhancing the lives of animals and promoting a more sustainable and compassionate food culture. So I'm now pleased to introduce our last but not least speaker of the day, Apoorva. So Apoorva is the founder and director of the Animal Law and Policy Network, which is the first independent think tank that aims to advance animal law research and policy in India. So the ALPN, in short, plans to use law and policy research as a tool to create a large-scale positive impact on the lives of farmed animals. So thank you so much for being with us today, and it's an honor to have you, Apoorva. And now the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Sabine. Thank you for having me here and for giving me the opportunity to talk about the work we do in India. Sorry, my apologies. I'm a little nervous coming after these three lovely, brilliant presentations, but I will try to do the best I can to talk about the issue that I want to highlight. I'll quickly share my screen, and I'd be grateful if you could let me know if it's visible. Yeah?
Yes,
Okay,
okay.
perfect. Okay, so the topic that I decided that I wanted to speak about was policy research for farmed animals in India. A lot of work has happened for farmed animals in India, but ALPN is a young organization. So I wanted to talk a little bit about us and why we focus on policy research so much for advancing animal welfare in the country. And I also wanted to introduce the Indian context a little bit because India is a developing country, and the situation in India is very different from a lot of other countries. There are also a few misconceptions when it comes to India. People don't realize that India is one of the largest producers of animal products in the world. We have the largest livestock population in the world. So even though we're not one of the largest countries, we have one of the largest populations of farmed animals in the world. And there are a lot of other issues which are very peculiar to India. We're a country of immense diversity and immense inequality at the same time. So there are certain issues which make policy research critical for a country like India that I wanted to highlight. Now, a little bit about ALPN because we're one of the few organizations working on policy research in India. As Sabine mentioned, we're the first independent think tank in India that works on law and policy research in the country. We were set up last year in October, so we completed a year yesterday. Our mission is to drive legal and policy change to improve the lives of animals in a manner that fosters the well-being of humans, the environment, and animals themselves. And I will come to that intersection. Why doesn't it just say animals? Why humans? Why environment? And why that is so specific to the Indian context. Some of our core values are collaboration, dialogue, transparency, integrity in our research, intersectionality, and absolute independence in the work we do. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit about why we need intersectional policy research in the Indian context. Now, India is a developing country, and there is a lot of human suffering as well. There's a large population of people living below the poverty line. There are small farmers, and that's something I've mentioned towards the end of the slide as well. There are small farmers who have, say, one or two cattle who they depend on for nutritional security. So in such a context, just talking about animal welfare and animal rights often doesn't resonate with the majority of the people. It may seem as being elitist or is not being in touch with the reality of the country's people. So in that sense, interconnectedness becomes a way to reconcile these issues. So once we can highlight how animal welfare is interconnected with public health, with environment, health, with climate change, and so many labor laws and so many other issues, it becomes easier for people to understand, and it becomes easier for them to accept why animals should be prioritized and why their welfare should be accounted for. There's also massive lack of research in India. There's a lack of, so there is enough data. There is plenty of data. So if you look at government documents, you have data on how fast intensification of Indian agriculture, animal agriculture is happening in India. But it's putting that data together and making it into a narrative for higher standards of animal welfare, that's something that has been missing from the discourse. What has happened is that the society is often divided, the Indian society is often divided into these two groups, where on one hand you have the animal rights, pro-animal welfare groups. On the other hand, you have people who completely oppose this and consider this as a non-issue or as an issue that is detrimental to other issues. So somewhere there needs to be a bridge, and we believe that bridge can be more information. If we can give people evidence-based research that can help them contextualize what is happening in the country without making it an emotional appeal, it is quite likely that we will be able to convince. And by people here, I mean policymakers. Now, the ALPN is not an organization that is focused on mass public opinion change. We're focused on driving legal and policy change on behalf of animals, right? So our target audience is often policymakers, it is government officials, it is lawyers, most importantly. And for this, we have decided that our research and advocacy needs to be objective, it needs to be data-driven, it needs to be evidence-based, and definitely intersectional and actionable. Now, I have come across a lot of criticism sometimes of the intersectional approach. It is considered as diluting the cause of animal justice or the cause of animal rights because you're looking at the intersections and not just the animals. But the fact is, we live in a world where we all inhabit the world, and the interconnectedness exists whether we recognize it or not. So if we explore these intersections further, and they help us build a better world for everybody, that is the real possibility. So why should we not take that opportunity up? And I'll give you some examples of the kind of intersectional work I'm talking about. For instance, at ALPN, we're working on a project on aquaculture. We're trying to see, so aquaculture does not, the laws and policies regulating aquaculture in India don't really talk about fish welfare. So billions of fish that are farmed every year, there is very little talk about, there is actually no talk apart from this wonderful organization called Fish Welfare Initiative working in India. There's very little talk about fishes requiring welfare. So through our aquaculture project, we're trying to explore the link between human health and fish welfare. And we're trying to see whether there are any laws and policies that can be enacted that we can lobby for, or that we can draft and work towards to ensure that fish welfare is protected. At the same time, human health is protected. So it's a win-win situation for everybody. Another thing that we're trying to do at ALPN is we're trying to build animal law expertise in the country. Animal law is looked at as this extremely niche field, maybe a subset of environmental law. And there is very little recognition of animal law as a separate area, a separate field of law. So one of the other projects that we're working on is a handbook of animal law and policy in India, where we're collaborating with lawyers from across the country to come up with this handbook. Another strategy, and a lot of developments in Indian animal law, especially as far as farmed animals are concerned, have come from the judiciary. So there have been a lot of landmark cases with respect to livestock markets, with respect to battery cages, with respect, and there have been policy interventions, let's say, with respect to farrowing crates. So farrowing crates are not really used in India, but there have been preemptive bans on their use in many states in the country, which has been led by many animal protection organizations. So we wanted to analyze if approaching the judiciary, which can be a very costly exercise, is the best strategy for animal lawyers. And that is why we're working on a research paper to examine the role of the judiciary in the development of animal law in India. We're also currently working on looking to start projects looking at the intersection of labor laws in poultry farms in India, and we're looking to start a fellowship program for lawyers to bring to create an army of animal lawyers in India. And with that, I just want to thank you and for listening to me and letting me explain the kind of work we're doing in India. We're at a very preliminary stage, and we hope that we will achieve outcomes like the previous speakers have achieved. But we are still a young organization, and we're working towards achieving these outcomes. And thank you for listening to me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Apoorva. Yeah, you brilliantly highlighted the challenges posed by the lack of India-specific information and how the ALPN proposes to address this with the value this can have for farmed animal advocacy movement in India. Thank you so much. I'm also saying a big thank you to the ALPN for being a partner of Farmed Animal Justice and to continue fostering this global animal law advocacy together and worldwide. So I also take this opportunity to say that World Animal Justice is also a young organization like you. And so, yes, we have the chance to be collaborating with amazing people like you and others really engaged to make a change for animals. So now it's time for our panel discussion. So since you have raised so well the some legal victories and challenges in presence to protect farm animals around the world, and if I may, I saw that there is a question in the chat for you, Giulia. So maybe we can start with this question if you would like to answer it directly, because it's very interesting maybe for everyone to benefit from your direct answer.
Yes, let me just start by saying I really enjoyed the previous presentation. So thanks again for organizing this. Thanks again for the question. Yeah, I think I've written an answer, but maybe for the recording, it's good to have it live as well. So in the question, I was asked if we have an estimate of how many wild octopuses live and die in the oceans, what are the environmental impacts of octopus farms, and if criminalizing ecocide would benefit octopuses in some way. So as I said, it's kind of harder to estimate the numbers of wild octopuses currently, that are captured in the ocean. I would say this applies to every aquatic species. Maybe for context, I can say that usually even fish stocks are referred in tons. So basically by their weight, not as the individual animal, which, I think is absurd. But that makes it harder to figure out how many animals are involved in the seafood supply chain. So this also applies to octopuses. And because of their, solitary nature, and they adapt, so they might vary habitats, it's even harder, I think, to keep track of their populations. We just know that they are declining. So I can tell you that because the consumption is increasing, obviously the wild populations are suffering more. And we were talking to some local fishermen who, have maybe been catching octopuses in the wild for years, and now they're saying they don't find as many. Which is unfortunately not a good news, because it means that their stocks are being depleted. And for the other parts of the question, I briefly mentioned in my talk some of the main environmental challenges. So maybe as a recap, as mentioned, depleting the fish stocks in order to get octopuses the feed that they need, which is again wild octopus, wild caught fish often. The waste produced by the farms, usually these farms, even if they're created on land, they would release effluents and pollutants in the surrounding waters. So obviously there's big pollution to the ecosystem. And yeah, the escapes that I mentioned, because often animals on farms are given antibiotics and honestly any kind of medication. And if they escape, they basically there's a like genetic how do you say it in English? But yeah, there's a problem with basically they mix with the wild population. So obviously there is a problem with genetic abnormalities, that get created. And yeah, I'm a big fan of criminalizing ecocide. I believe there's several benefits, even indirect ones, that can benefit octopuses. And as I mentioned, habitat destruction, so they would still have a home at the bottom of the ocean and where to live. Hopefully, proactive banning of harmful practices and just raising awareness, to carefully and rightfully care for the environment. So I hope this answers the question.
Yeah, thank you so much, Giulia. It was a great and comprehensive answer, as you know how to do. And yes, just to give maybe a small information about ecocide. So there is a small group of Pacific Islands who did who called the International Criminal Court to include ecocide as a separate crime under the Rome Statute. And so, as you may know, at World Animal Justice, so we are working to criminalize the crimes against animality at the International Criminal Court and in international criminal law in general. And so we are definitely working on this possible bridge of ecocide to then reach these crimes against animality afterwards in international criminal law. But definitely ecocide needs to include animal crimes and at least wildlife crimes, which is still an advocacy work that we need to do, because for now, the legal definition of ecocide that have been proposed do not include animals, but only biosphere, which is very huge and may include, of course, all living beings, including microorganisms. So yeah, that's a work we need to do with ecocide, which is definitely very important. And so if I may just ask a question to our great panelists today, I was wondering if we can draw maybe or think of drawing a general roadmap which would highlight some key steps of the general processes that that have been successful so far to advocate in favor of the adoptions of new legal bans on cruel farming practices, and based also on how to convince decision makers in front of the weight of the farm industries. So I'm not sure if my question is clear, but yeah, you raised some key steps in the process that we need to put forward to convince decision makers to adopt legal bans to prohibit some cruel farming practices. And I was wondering if we could draw a general, let's say, template then to be adapted to each cases, and of course each jurisdictions and cultural disparities. But at least can we fix some big steps, pillars on this advocacy path? From, as you said, Roslyn, there was this undercover investigation first. So the reality is revealed to the public and decision makers of what is happening. Then there is a work of advocacy from civil society, with NGOs, with petitions, with public opinions polls, and with economical analysis. Also, all these important information work. and then to communicate, and then to lobby more to the politicians, the decision makers, to adopt then some solutions to ban these practices. So I was wondering, can we draw this general template of undercover investigation, then information and analysis, then communication, then lobby, and then finally adopt something? Is it something that we can think about and to help all animal advocates and lobbyists around the world to have not a magical template, because it doesn't exist and each case is different and so on, but to make the best of what could work so far, and in case it can help all of us to move forward with the good tips of what works and maybe what doesn't or maybe never work. So I don't know who wants to go first, but please jump in and feel free to answer if you have ideas.
Well, I'm happy to jump in. That's okay. Just as you mentioned, Sabine, and I mentioned in my presentation, it was absolutely critical, these investigations that Animals Australia conducted undercover. They have an extraordinary team. They have an in-house lawyer called Shata Hamade. She actually goes undercover in the Middle East, and she has done some incredible investigations that have become the foundation of some of the legal victories that they've had, or legal challenges that they've been able to mount, and also the basis of some of the media exposés that we've seen here in Australia. Likewise, her amazing colleague, Lynn White, who's a former police officer who now is in a very senior role with Animals Australia. So they have been a really driving force here. And I think in terms of a template, we're very fortunate to have Animals Australia here, because they've really forged a pathway and created a template of how to go about amassing evidence, just at the front line, conducting these investigations, amassing the evidence, often very confronting, very distressing evidence of animal cruelty, then effectively packaging that up and presenting it to policymakers, and backed up with a very strong sort of legal force behind them. So wherever they see an opening for a legal challenge, they will take that as well to further the case. So they've been incredibly effective doing that, and it's really formed the foundation of the live export case here in Australia that we've all built on. Without the work of Animals Australia, it just simply would not have happened. So it's been very much a collective advocacy effort, but I really want to give due credit to the driving force that is Animals Australia and their investigations and their incredible team there. So I think it does provide a helpful template. How it translates to other countries, I'm not sure. There is some universality, I guess, but also there are differing factors and differing political systems that you have to work within. But also, as I mentioned in my presentation, I think it's absolutely critical that we elevate animal welfare and protection within governments with, excuse me, with designated ministerial portfolios for animal welfare, with designated offices or commissions for animal welfare, so that there, as part of the political and governance structure, there is a space and a voice for animal welfare and animal issues to be considered, to something that gives them a seat at the table, even if it's by a proxy. They have to be there, they have to be considered where decisions and laws are being made, or as we've seen, so often their interests are just sidelined, trivialized, or overtaken by commercial considerations.
Yes, thank you so much, Roslyn. Yeah, it's a great answer. And I remember that in your presentation, you also raised that in the end, a coalition of organizations were constituted by Animals Australia with other big organizations. So probably also the union is strength is also part of this successful strategy. And I was wondering also for you, Giulia, who could participate to this victories for octopus in the US. So I know that probably the scientific and ethical research part is important to advocate for octopus in showing that they're sentient beings and of course that their welfare should be protected. So I'm here joining the hard work of Apoorva also with the research and policy frameworks to set this type of strategies. But yeah, Giulia, do you think that from a case to another, at least in the US, are you like now using some efficiency roadmaps that used to work, even if it's different jurisdictions, people, and maybe different industries, I'm not sure. But yeah, did you identify some things that you can continue to use and that works in the US and maybe in other countries, or not?
Yeah, thank you. I really like this question because I always say that to me, policy work, in order to be successful, needs to be ready to adapt to the needs or to the agendas, especially if we're talking now about how to convince a legislator or a policymaker. I think maybe the best answer, on top of what Roslyn already shared, which I fully agree with, I think maybe I can share like from a mistake that I learned, which was, I just thought everybody would be on board by just explaining the welfare concerns, right? Like, it's so obvious to me, this is a terrible idea, and that's it. So because legislators and policymakers come from all walks of life, really, they have their own biases, agendas, interests, anything you can think of. I realized, okay, this welfare argument is not resonating with everyone. And, it's just a fact that we need to take into account, as it might be with other issues, even like when we're talking about the live exports, most people might simply not care about that. And so we find other things that they care about. And so this was implicitly, I think, in my presentation. So some strategies that we used, as you could tell, was using the other issues that a farming practice would cause: environmental issues, public health risks, so the risk of pathogen spread. That's, for example, what in the US is gaining a lot of traction, because after COVID, there is rightfully kind of a lot of fear of the next pandemic, and thinking that octopus farming could be the next driver of the next pandemic, stimulates legislators to take action. So yeah, that's, I think, a format that I guess I can say is our adapted template now. So pushing more on the environmental concerns associated with the practice resonates a lot better. So that is something that I would encourage advocates to, explore each issue on multiple levels, right? And depending on who your stakeholder is, adapt your messaging to whatever they care the most. Because in the end, our goal is to bring the legislation home, right? So the path that we choose to do it, to me, matters less than driving it home. So yeah, I guess in a nutshell. But obviously, maybe one disclaimer that I want to add, and I think Roslyn touched a little bit on that, depending on the jurisdiction that you work in, you need to be ready, again, to adapt and change your messaging, because maybe different constituents care and need different things. So I think you need to be ready to maybe have a template that you can adjust.
Yes, great. Thank you so much, Giulia. Yeah, indeed, it's very important to raise all these tips and also the reality also of the politicians' contexts. And what really pops in my mind when you say that is that even if now it's kind of obvious that so many animals are sentient beings and that we have so many anti-cruelty laws and that even their sentience is recognized and there is animal welfare laws, the anthropocentric argument is still very predominant as a predominant paradigm in the law in general, but also in international law. And as you said, it's more human-centered arguments like human health issues and environmental issues, also somehow related to humans concerns that may be more winning arguments than animal suffering in itself, even if it's huge, and that now there is a consensus that animal sentience and welfare should be protected, but still, we are still far from this new zoo-centered or eco, at least eco kind of equity between humans and non-human animals. So yes, Apoorva, maybe would you like to add something on this question with your background research and policy work, which is really important, probably at the start or somewhere at the start of this strategy roadmap.
Yeah, absolutely,
Between
absolutely.
knowing the reality and having a legislation adopted in the end. Yeah, please.
No, I absolutely agree. I think we have to be uh, very strategic about what issues we decide to pursue. And I think that is where I really, I'm a fan of Aquatic Life Institute's selection of the issue of preemptive ban on octopus farming, because I think that was an issue where building public opinion in your favor, there were very valid grounds that you could strategically pursue this issue. So I think that is where research comes in. So I think instead of just responding to the situations that are in front of us or that are, personally irksome to us, we have to be more strategic in our approach and use research. Like noticed that in Giulia's presentation, she talked about an article leading them to think about uh, investigating the claims made in this, right? Looking at the research, is it really going to help us, use less wild-caught octopus, or is it really going to boost populations of animals? So I think we have to be extremely selective about the issues we can pursue because there are so few of them that we have the resources to pursue. I think once we have selected the issues, uh, and I completely agree with Giulia's point about knowing what your stakeholders' priorities are. So, yes, animal welfare is a big concern for me. It may not be for the government official who is responsible for fisheries and associated industries. So, speaking to them in their language really helps. And I just don't mean the literal language, but in parlance that they understand. Um, and that doesn't dilute the cause of animal welfare because I always tell myself I don't think the animals care why they were spared the suffering and why they were spared the torture um, that they have to endure because of human activities. So I think knowing the priorities of your stakeholders is extremely important. And in countries like India, where the government is the biggest change maker, where the government holds immense power, I think building a positive working relationship with government officials in such countries is really important. So instead, we are very small as a movement in comparison to the just sheer strength of a government in a country like India. So it's best to sort of partner with them and to help them because at the end of the day, the government really is for the people. Like in a democracy, it's government of, for, and by the people. So If we can harness the potential of the government to make change in favor of animals by working collaboratively with them, I think that can go a long way in bringing about change. And I've seen there are models in India, there are organizations who worked closely with the government and managed to achieve massive change for animals. Um, so I think that is a model that we need. I mean, different countries, some countries might require pressure campaigns, but in certain countries, it's just easier to work with them and not against them. Um, so that's my 2 cents.
Thank you so much, Apoorva. I mean, there is a lot of takeaways that I really like from this discussion. With this well thought and focused strategy, ready to adapt and to know really the policymakers' priorities and speak their language for messages they can understand, and with arguments that are convincing enough for them to take this issue seriously, and even to make the choice to engage in favor of a change. This is all very, very important. So thank you very much for that. Maybe a very last small question to you, Nancy, before getting to the chat questions. Nancy, I was wondering for the vegan plant-based advocacy in Africa and generally, I mean, worldwide, we know that it's way cheaper to produce plant-based proteins, say like 1 kilo of soy, rather than 1 kilo of meat, which needs much more resources in terms of food, in terms of water, medicine, transport, logistics, human resources, and so on. In Africa, do you think that it can be an argument, this economical argument, to say to the industrial farmers that are there, that if they transition to plant-based protein production, they will win more in the end, because they can sell their plant-based protein at a higher cost than the meat proteins, which is really costly to produce. And in the end, they can make a lot of economies, so gain more in the end, you know? So that's really something I'm interested in, because I know that the business priority is money, right? But if we can make the argument, which is quite easy to do, that they would win more in producing plant-based proteins for the benefits of all, right? Humans, animals, planets. And also, which would be in accordance with all the international engagements in favor of protecting environment, human health and One Health, and of course, animal welfare. Can it be, coming off, in Africa and generally? Because, I mean, we know that in other regions of the world, like in Europe, there's a lot of subsidies, right? Subsidies to farm industries and farming in general. But without these subsidies, these industries would probably function much less or even die, and should probably do otherwise. So what is your point, with special African focus? Beyond the cultural arguments that you raised, there's now economical arguments behind these questions.
Thank you, Sabine. I think, like you are saying, what's important is for the farmers right now is the economic gain, the money that they make with much less input. So there is a lot of work, or it would take quite a lot of work for us to convince them otherwise, to say, look, yes, you're making more money this way, but could you look at this side? It's going to take time for you to get there, but eventually you will make more if you produce other alternatives instead of meat. So it's an issue of how do we convince them? How do we tell them to take the loss per se for now, for the short period, but with a look at the future where there's a higher where they make more money. So what then do we do? What do we say, or how do we convince them? I think one of the ways it would actually involve, for me, it would involve a multi-stakeholder collaboration. I don't think you should just focus on the issue of making money, but try and show them that there's other benefits to it if they transition from making more meat products or producing more meat, and then they try the alternatives. So there should be more people working on it. There should be other things like Giulia was talking about, the human-centered things that they want. You talk about the environment, health, you talk about their health as well. You try and show them there's the issue of antimicrobial resistance as well, which will eventually impact on their health as well. So it's like a collective campaign that you have to do to convince them, and not just focus on the issue of money, even though for them, they will be focusing on simply making money. But we've got to show that there's other benefits that come with us or with them transitioning from producing meat only as a source of protein.
Yes, thank you very much, Nancy. Yeah, it's very clear, yeah, that for policymakers we have to speak their language and their priorities, as you said, with health and environment. And I was more talking for the industries themselves, who are driven really by economical arguments that we may probably more advocate in the sense of these economical arguments and points that that's not true, that producing animals is making more money than producing plant-based proteins, because they would make actually more money in producing plant-based proteins rather than animal proteins, because as I raised before, animal proteins need a lot of resources and logistics and all forms of costly logistics that are not needed to produce 1 kilo of plant protein. Yes, I saw Apoorva, you have your hand raised, but maybe you, if you want to, jump in quickly. So I will
Very
then
quickly, I just wanted to
Yeah.
add that let's not forget that animal agriculture is heavily subsidized. So if we have subsidies and schemes to provide subsidies for plant-based proteins and that sector and the inputs that go into plant-based proteins, it would actually be much more cost effective for them. And that's something we hope to push in India as well. So more subsidies for the inputs that are required for plant-based proteins, and hopefully at some point also transition schemes for farmers and producers who do want to move away from animal agriculture, because it's not the most it is not the most cost effective. There are in fact we're actually hoping to at some point study the economic implications for the farmers themselves who are engaged in animal agriculture, because it's often not very beneficial for them either. So looking at all of this, I think it will it is obvious that producers can transition towards plant-based alternatives if they're given the right policy support by their governments.
Yes, thank you so much. Yeah, and the right economical support as well, as you said, with subsidies, also transitioning and a percentage maybe being reaffected from farm industries to plant-based production with 20%, then 50%, then more percentage of this subsidies being redirected to produce more plant-based protein, which we would be smart. I mean, from all perspectives, right? Animals, humans, and environment alike, which is quite easy and obvious to understand. So yes, now I'm handing over to Dulki. If you saw some interesting questions, I see that we have 2 questions, so maybe we can cover them both with quick answers. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Sabine, and thank you so much to our wonderful panel of speakers for this thought-provoking session. We have 2 open questions. Well, the first one, I think any speaker who's willing to can answer. And the second one, because we only have a limited period of time, maybe Nancy can type your answer. I think the second one is for you, Nancy. Thank you so much. And this is the question that we can discuss now. What is your opinion on how to overcome the economic barrier of banning an essentially economic activity? And is it necessary to propose a reform and a reconversion of the sector and or compensation? Thank you.
Yes,
I think Giulia can start, maybe. Yes. Thanks.
Sure, thank you. And yes, I wish I had a straightforward answer, like, oh, this is how we stop the subsidies, or avoid the economic problem. Maybe, yeah, just for the sake of time, I can confirm that it's a huge issue. Something that I didn't mention in my presentation is that, for example, we were investigating Mexico, like a research facility in Mexico who is trying to intensively breed octopuses in captivity. So technically that's not a farm, it's still a research facility. But the reason why they were doing this project is because they received a grant from the United Nations Development Program. So this is a big problem because the United Nations, in our view, should support sustainable projects, right? So giving money in order to figure out how to domesticate and breed in captivity another unsuitable animal to captivity is just not the right answer. So we've been trying, to send letters and obviously try and raise awareness on this. But I'm not gonna lie, I mean, it's a hard job. Maybe like compensation, transitioning to true sustainable alternatives, it's a right path forward. There are a lot of programs and initiatives on this. So maybe I see some potential in there. But I think the big step that we need to overcome is just the awareness. This is not a sustainable practice. Nobody should fund it. We should not support it. So I'm curious to hear what the other speakers think.
I can jump in if that's okay.
Yes, of
Yeah.
course, Apoorva.
Yeah, so as far as banning an essentially economic activity is concerned, I don't think bans are the solution, but yes, transitioning away from these activities which are injurious to animals, they're injurious to people, also helps. So if you look at slaughterhouses, for instance, they're terrible for the animals, of course, but they're also terrible for the people who work there. So it's not beneficial. If you look at the studies that have been done on slaughterhouse workers, you will come to realize that it's one of the most oppressive sort of work environments to be in. So transitioning away from that, so the loss of such jobs is not something that we should worry about that much, because we can help them transition towards other upskilling schemes. Upskilling initiatives can really help in such cases. So there are plenty of ways. No one's saying that we ban animal farming tomorrow. It will happen over a considerable period of time where it can be slowly phased out and by ensuring compensation and subsidies and transition funding for the same.
Yes, thank you so much, Apoorva. Roslyn, would you like to share your thoughts as well?
Thank you, Giulia. Yes, as I touched on in my presentation, what's happening in Australia with the ban of the live sheep trade is the government has put in a 4-year transition, and they've got a $107 million package, which will go directly to industry participants and the farmers to help them transition out of it. And as I mentioned, economic analysis that's been done on this shows that a lot of this transition has already been occurring, that the industry participants can see that this industry doesn't have really much of a future anyway. It's actually an unnecessary trade. It certainly with the sheep meat industry, what they call the boxed meat trade has really overtaken the live export trade in terms of sending meat to the Middle East. There are still some markets, as I mentioned, who insist on having live animals, and Australia or other countries are under no obligation to supply them. So, you know, that's their problem, essentially. But I think, as some of the other panelists have mentioned, transition is important. The move into more sustainable, more ethical sectors is critical. Like, for example, it would be great to see governments putting some more money into the development of plant-based foods, because, you know, Australia certainly is lagging behind the world in that. Cell-based agriculture, what do you call it? Is it the analog meats, like the Impossible meat, burgers, that kind of thing? Developing an industry around that, which is actually based on animal cells. So there is a role for current animal farmers to play in that, but they certainly wouldn't need the population of animals that they currently are raising and, you know, ultimately sending to slaughter. So it's clearly far better for the animals and a lot more ethical. I'm not sure what else I can say on this. Some jobs will go. That's the reality. You know, nothing is forever, and, you know, industries develop and don't necessarily survive. And I think the live export trade is certainly a classic example of that. It's a very archaic trade. It really has no place in the 21st century. And I think we'll increasingly see jurisdictions ending it. There will probably be some holdouts, but, you know, I'm hopeful that over time we will prevail, and, you know, in our lifetimes that it will end.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Roslyn. If this is okay for everyone, and for time's sake, I think it's time to end this webinar. And I want to warmly thank all our wonderful panelists, and thank you for attendees for joining us, and have a very great day, and good luck for continuing to combat animal crimes and fight for animal rights.
So much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you so much.